Welcome back now for the news in detail. We start from Sudan, where the ruling military says it has thwarted another coup attempt launched to scuttle a recent power-sharing agreement with the civilian opposition. State media said 16 serving and retired military officers have been arrested. Security Chief Jamal Umar Ibrahim said others suspected of involvement in the failed takeover are under investigation. This is the second coup attempted by military officers in the last 30 days, highlighting divisions within the armed forces. It comes amid negotiations between the ruling government and protest leaders over the implementation of a power-sharing deal. The military and a pro-democracy coalition agreed on a joint sovereign council last week with a rotating leadership. It will rule Sudan for 3 years before elections are held. Moving on, residents of Tehran support Iran's attempt of blocking a British oil tanker passing through the Strait of Hormuz, an allegation the government denies. This comes a week after British Royal Marines helped the authorities in Gibraltar seize an Iranian tanker. More in this report.
Tensions between the two countries escalated after Britain seized Iran's tanker, accusing it of breaching EU sanctions by shipping oil to Syria. Iran threatened Britain with repercussions over the seizure. Britain now says Iran's Revolutionary Guards tried to block its boat, an allegation Iran denies.
For now, Iran's Revolutionary Guard has denied this, but if they want to do such a thing, be sure that they have the power and authority to not only seize one tanker, but many of theirs.
A military analyst said the response from Iran was evident as many high-ranking officials warned of retaliation.
The measures that Britain has taken now require us to show a reaction because our national interests are in danger, and this is one of our national interests.
Iran is under increasing pressure since the US President Donald Trump pulled out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action last year. With Iranians standing firm in their beliefs of upholding the deal, America's not convinced it's the right one.
In another development, Gibraltar police have arrested the captain and chief officer of a seized Iranian oil tanker. The two officers are Indian nationals. Police say the tanker breached EU sanctions by shipping oil to Syria. Gibraltar police are interrogating both officers who have been accorded legal entitlements and consular access. Police say the investigation is ongoing and the tanker is still detained. The arrest come after London said armed Iranian boat tried to impede a UK supertanker in the Gulf. Meanwhile, Iran says France has made an unspecified proposal to prevent a further escalation of tensions between the United States and Iran over the 2015 nuclear deal. Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif did not share details of the proposals made during French presidential advisor Emmanuel Bon's visit. Bon met Zarif and other senior Iranian officials yesterday during an official visit to Tehran undertaken to prevent the collapse of the nuclear accord. Zarif says he told Bon Europe should fulfill its commitments to save the 2015 deal if the United States does not lift unilateral sanctions. Russia has threatened the UK with retaliatory measures following a ban on its journalists. UK's Foreign Office barred Russia's RT and Sputnik from a media freedom conference in London this week. Russia's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said British media organizations working in Russia should prepare to bear the consequences. Zakharova said London's actions were a propaganda attack on the Russian media. She said the UK declined to explain its refusal to allow RT and Sputnik to the Conference on Media Freedom. She said the Russian news organizations were barred from spreading disinformation. Britain also declined to grant a visa to the Russian diplomat it had previously invited to attend the meeting. Now, Russia's President Vladimir Putin and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky have spoken, breaking a 5-year diplomatic silence. In talks held over the phone, the two leaders agreed to continue high-level discussions. The Kremlin says Putin and Zelensky discussed the conflict in eastern Ukraine and an exchange of prisoners. They agreed to continue bilateral dialogue at the expert level. Moscow says the possibility of continuing diplomatic contacts through the Normandy format was also considered. This comes after Zelensky called for Western-mediated talks with Russia. The conflict started after Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimea Peninsula in 2014. Now, for more on this, we are joined by Harry Horton, our Indus correspondent from Moscow. Now, Harry, we're joined. Could you tell us how significant is this resumption of dialogue between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, it is significant. It's a first step. We shouldn't get too carried away with this. It's just a brief telephone call between the two leaders. But the fact that they are talking would be encouraging for those who are looking for peace in eastern Ukraine. That we are told, based on the statements released by both the Kremlin and the Ukrainian Prime Minister's office, was the bulk of the talks, the conflict in eastern Ukraine and this prisoner swap between the two countries, possible prisoner swap between the two countries. Earlier, before this phone conversation, the Ukrainian president spoke about the possibility of having these mediated talks, which would be mediated by the United States, the United Kingdom, France and Germany. President Putin responded to that. He was slightly more cautious about the possibility of those talks. He said that, first of all, he wants to see elections in the Ukrainian parliament, see how that plays out, and he said he wasn't sure whether those countries would be willing to mediate those talks. So clearly there's a very long way to go before we can get to the possibility of having those peace talks. But I think the fact that the two leaders are talking will be an encouraging sign to many people who hope to try and end this conflict in eastern Ukraine that's been going on since 2014.
Right, Harry. We already know Ukraine's President Zelensky was elected with a strong mandate, but he is considered inexperienced. So, Harry, does he have the domestic support and negotiating skills to strike a deal with Vladimir Putin?
Well, that's a very good question. And in short, it's a question that we don't know the answer to. There's still an awful lot about Vladimir Zelensky that we don't know because his election was such a surprise. He wasn't a politician previously. You know, he was famously, of course, he was an actor who played the president on TV. So we don't quite know enough about what his negotiating style will be with Russia, what concessions he might be prepared to make with Russia as part of these talks. What we do know is this is a priority for him. At his inauguration, when he became president of Ukraine, he spoke about how it was a priority to end the conflict in eastern Ukraine and, as he put it, to run the parts of the country that had been annexed by Russia. So this is something that he wants to see resolved and something he's keen to pursue. But how exactly he plans to go about doing that, that's still a question we don't know the answer to.
Right, Harry. So there was a breakthrough last month in relations between Russia and Europe, as well, following Prime Minister Medvedev's visit to France. So, Harry, as host of the Normandy format talks, how important is France's role?
Well, pretty important. You know, clearly having other countries to mediate these talks is essential to try and move them along. But you know, another complicating factor here, and critics who point out that peace talks have failed to progress really in the past 5 years. One of the reasons they put forward for that is the fact that the European Union has imposed such heavy sanctions on Russia for its annexation of Crimea. Critics feel that has been one of the major stumbling blocks towards moving towards some sort of peace agreement. Of course, France, as one of the key players in the European Union, has been a part of that. So that is an added factor here that presumably will be part of talks. At what stage during peace negotiations does the lifting of sanctions of Russia come into play? And again, it's not clear from the European Union's point of view when that threshold will be reached.
Right, thank you, Harry. That was our correspondent from Moscow, Russia, Harry Horton, updating us on the relations between Russia and Ukraine. Now moving on with the news stories. Prime Minister candidates Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt have promised to stand up for UK's diplomats around the world. This follows the resignation of Britain's ambassador to the US, Kim Darroch, over leaked memos that attracted criticism from President Donald Trump. Foreign Secretary Hunt says he has written to all British diplomats, promising always to hit back them to hit Johnson. The favourite to succeed Prime Minister Theresa May flip-flopped, pledging to stand by UK's ambassadors after refusing to back Darroch earlier.
The UK will stand up for the UK interest. The UK will stand up for, and I will stand up for our fantastic diplomats across the world. I just don't think that their careers should be used as political footballs.
Boris Johnson came under fierce criticism from both sides in Parliament for earlier declining to support Darroch. Now, 39 more fighters have been killed in ongoing clashes between Syrian government forces and militants in northwestern Hama province. Over 120 have been killed in the past 48 hours. Monitors say government forces have regained land from militants in an advance of the village of Hamamiyat. Former Al-Qaeda militants seized control of the village and a hilltop earlier this week. Monitors say fighting is ongoing across northwest Syria as regime planes and artillery pound the region. Now in Libya, a car bomb has killed 4 people at a funeral of a former military in the eastern city of Benghazi. Medics say at least 15 others were wounded in the attack. Security officials say it was the first attack in the city for over a year. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now continuing with the news stories. Flash floods triggered by incessant rain have killed 5 people in northeastern India. The states of Assam and Arunachal Pradesh are the worst hit by recent downpours. Officials in Assam say 3 people were killed in the flooding and 2 others died in landslides. The officials say over 400,000 people in Assam have been marooned. No let-up in the rain is expected for the next 2 days. The UN has called for an investigation into the alleged extrajudicial killings of thousands of people. This comes after Amnesty International highlighted the issue earlier this week. The UN Human Rights Council passed a resolution demanding a report on Manila's war on drugs. The report will focus on extrajudicial killings, arbitrary arrests and enforced disappearances. Manila has rejected the UN Council's decision, calling it a travesty.
We will not accept a politically partisan and one-sided resolution so detached from the truth on the ground. It comes straight from the mouth of the Queen in Alice in Wonderland. First the judgment, then the proof.
President Duterte launched the anti-narcotics campaign in 2016 to deal with Manila's rampant drug problem. The government has acknowledged 6,600 deaths, but activists claim the death toll could exceed to 27,000. Now moving on, a gym in California is using calories burned by its clients to power up the facility. The gym owner says one of his spin classes can generate anywhere between 1,000 to 2,500 watts of electricity. More in this report.
These exercise bikes may look like regular gym equipment, but there is one important difference. They have dedicated inverters similar to those found on solar panels or wind turbines. This means the bikes can turn watts generated during a workout into electricity.
So it just really depends on the individual and how fast they're going. But on average, you'll at least produce 20 watts, with a 20-minute workout. So 1 watt per minute if you're just going the basic resistance. But if you want to kick it up a notch, you can honestly make anywhere close to 50 watts in those 20 minutes.
Sacramento ECO Fitness also has similar non-motorized treadmills. Many members say they joined the gym to use the eco-cardio machines.
Combining fitness and something that's, of course, really good for you and the environment is just probably one of the best ideas that anybody could ever come up with.
The gym owner says this is only the beginning. He says he wants all the gyms to follow his model, using excess energy to power city blocks. But for now, the energy produced during one of his spin classes is only enough to power a fridge.
Meanwhile, library buses are bringing books for children in war-torn Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. This new idea is being appreciated for its services to young Afghans. More details in this report.
Since 2001, the Taliban have waged an insurgency against the US-backed government in Kabul. 3,804 civilians, including more than 900 children, were killed in 2018 alone. But Freshta is determined to ensure that Afghanistan's younger generation hold on to as much of their childhood as possible.
Right now we have two mobile libraries and one mobile cinema, and it's providing services in different parts of Kabul, in West Kabul and in another area which is a little bit disadvantaged.
The buses are rented from the government and run 5 days a week. The mobile libraries have hundreds of books in Dari, Pashto and English.
Whenever I read storybooks in this library bus, I imagine I'm in another world.
Afghanistan has the lowest literacy rate in the world. With that in mind, Freshta is committed to expanding the project to nearby provinces.
Washington has accused China of backsliding on promises to increase American farm imports. President Donald Trump says Beijing is letting the US down by not importing agricultural products. He hopes China will start buying farm goods soon. The statement comes after US and Chinese trade officials had their first contact to revive negotiations that nearly collapsed in May. Since last year, the two countries have traded tariffs of more than 600 and 360 billion, dollars in two-way trade. Asian stocks markets are treading water after Singapore published data showing its economy shrunk more than expected in the second quarter. Singapore reported its lowest annual growth in a decade, sharply down from the start of the year. Mainland Chinese stocks recovered from an early decline to rise 0.5% at the end of the morning session. Japan's Nikkei 225, Hong Kong's Hang Seng and South Korea's Kospi indices have all risen modestly. In Australia, the ASX 200 declined fractionally. Investors are awaiting the release of China's June trade numbers to assess the impact of the US-China trade war. Overnight on Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrial Average crossed 27,000 points for the first time ever. The S&P 500 also posted a record close amid optimism US interest rates could be cut later this month. Oil prices have risen in Asian market trading. Now, Tunisia and Algeria have qualified for the semi-finals of the Africa Cup of Nations. Tunisia defeated Madagascar by 3-0, while Algeria ousted Ivory Coast 4-3 on penalties. After a goalless first half, Tunisia's midfielder Ferjani Sassi opened the scoring against Madagascar in the 52nd minute. Striker Youssef Skani then doubled the lead with a short-range strike. Naim Slithi scored the third goal to seal the semi-final slot for Tunisia. Algeria defeated Ivory Coast 4-3 on penalties after they drew 1-1. The two sides will face off in the semi-finals on Sunday. Now let's have a look at the weather update around the globe. Well, that's all for now. For more news and updates, keep watching Indus News.